summer 1944, Normandy. Sergeant John Fury, collier of the 66th Tank Regiment, 2nd Armored Division, sat on the roadside, leaning against the charred wreck of his Sherman M4A1. It was the third tank he had lost in just 2 months. A single shot from a German Tiger I had turned the vehicle into a blazing inferno from a mile away. Collier cursed. "This damn tin can failed us again. 4th machine since the start of the war. How many more boys have to burn in these steel coffins?" Such hatred toward the Sherman was common among its crews. The tank carried a grim reputation and earned several scornful nicknames. American tankers called it the Ronson, after the lighter brand with the slogan, "Lights up the first time." The British dubbed it the Tommy Cooker, the soldier's stove. Once the armor was pierced, the tank burst into flames almost instantly. Another nickname was Brew Up, because a hit often turned the crew into a living fire. And yet, here lay the paradox. The very machines their crews despised ended up winning the war. A total of 49,234 Shermans rolled out of American factories, helping the Allies crush Germany, defeat Japan, and pave the way to the final capitulation of the Axis powers. The philosophy of American tank building. To understand this paradox, we need to look into the core of U.S. military strategy during World War II. Unlike the Germans, who saw the tank as an engineering masterpiece, Americans treated it primarily as a tool, a component within a vast military system. The German approach: each tank was a unique piece of engineering designed for maximum performance. The Tiger I weighed 57 tons, carried up to 100 millimeters of armor, and mounted the famous 88 millimeter gun, able to destroy any Allied tank from 2 kilometers away. But only 1,347 Tigers were ever built. The American approach: a tank was a means to achieve strategic goals. The Sherman weighed about 30 tons, had 25 to 75 millimeters of armor, and mounted a 75 millimeter gun. In one-on-one duels, it was no match for the Tiger or Panther, but the U.S. produced more than 49,000 Shermans, 36 times as many as the Tigers. The difference lay in the very philosophy of war. For Germany, the tank was a symbol of strength and perfection. For the United States, it was part of a massive war conveyor belt, built on logistics, standardization, and industrial-scale production. By 1943, the U.S. Army was fighting on 3 continents. Each theater of war demanded something different from its tanks. The Pacific Front, island operations required transporting tanks thousands of miles by sea. They had to be unloaded directly onto beaches under enemy fire. With no major repair bases available, all maintenance was done in the field. North Africa. Here, the heat and sandstorms clogged engines and wore out moving parts. Supply bases were separated by vast distances. The Army needed machines that were rugged, reliable, and easy to repair. Europe, the main stage of the war. In France and Germany, the Americans faced the most powerful armored force in the world. In duels against Panthers and Tigers, the Sherman often lost, but its numbers and repairability meant losses could be quickly replaced. The Tiger and Panther were terrifying opponents on European battlefields, but they were almost useless for amphibious landings on Pacific atolls or long-distance shipping across oceans. The Sherman, by contrast, was the compromise that could fight anywhere. American tank production was built on the principles of mass manufacturing, perfected before the war by the auto industry. The same companies that had put millions of cars on U.S. roads, Ford, General Motors, Chrysler, now applied those methods to tanks. The Sherman became the industrial age weapon, not a unique masterpiece of engineering, but a standardized product that could be built in immense numbers. Key principles of U.S. production. Standardized components. Shermans were assembled from parts produced by dozens of factories, all interchangeable. A Ford GAA engine, a Chrysler gearbox, Armor plates from Pittsburgh steel all converged at 11 assembly plants, turning out thousands of tanks on a single platform. Modular design. From the start, engineers built in the ability to upgrade without halting production. Versions M4, M4A1, M4A2, M4A3, M4A4 differed in details but shared the same base. Improvements could be introduced while the lines kept running. Repairability. German tanks required specialized facilities. The Sherman could be fixed in the field with simple tools, common spare parts, and a crew of mechanics. Scalability. At peak output in 1943, U.S. factories were producing 57 Shermans per day, a level of industrial throughput Germany could never match. Tactical doctrine. Tanks versus infantry. The deeper difference between the U.S. and German approach lay in how each defined the role of tanks. German doctrine. The tank was the decisive breakthrough weapon, designed to win duels against enemy armor. This meant thick armor and powerful guns. American doctrine. The tank was primarily a support weapon for infantry and a tool for breaking into the enemy's operational depth. Its job was to suppress enemy infantry, artillery, and strong points. Tank duels were a secondary task. Statistics from 2,000 armored engagements in Europe confirmed this logic. 86% of Sherman targets were enemy infantry and artillery. 12% were fortifications and buildings. Only 2% were enemy tanks. The Sherman was never designed to hunt tigers. It was built to destroy the bulk of the enemy's fighting force. In this role, it was highly effective. The economics of tank building. War is always about economics, and here the U.S. held a decisive advantage. Production cost, $1943. Sherman M, $444,556, is approximately equal to $640,000 today. Tiger 1, $300,000, is approximately equal to $4.3 million today. A Tiger costs 6.7 times more than a Sherman. For the price of one Tiger, the Americans could build 7 Shermans. On the battlefield, that translated into 35 to 40 Shermans for every German heavy tank. Production time. Sherman, 7,500 man-hours. Tiger, 23,000 man-hours. Material consumption. Sherman, 18 tons of steel. Tiger, 45 tons. The United States could afford to lose tanks and replace them. Germany could not. The Sherman was engineered with transport and field maintenance in mind. Transportation. The Sherman fit standard rail cars, ship holds, and bridges. The Tiger required special platforms and created logistical headaches everywhere it went. Maintenance. A Sherman could run roughly 1,000 hours without an overhaul. A Tiger needed major work every 150 to 200 hours. Fuel. The Sherman consumed about 3.5 gallons of gasoline per mile. The Tiger burned around 8 gallons of diesel per mile in ideal conditions. Spare parts. For the Sherman, there were about 40,000 standardized parts. For the Tiger, over 120,000 unique components. The human factor. Crew training. The U.S. Armored School trained a tank crew in just 17 weeks. The program included driving and mechanics, 4 weeks. Gunnery and tactics, 6 weeks. Command and communications, 4 weeks. Field exercises, 3 weeks. In Germany, training a Tiger crew required 52 weeks, but by 1944, there was no time left for a year-long course. The result? Americans rapidly fielded new crews, while the Germans threw undertrained men into highly complex machines. The psychology of tank warfare. The negative attitude of American crews toward the Sherman had deep roots. From inside the tank, they saw only one thing: their machine was weaker than the enemy's, and in a straight duel, it often lost. Every hit, every explosion felt like proof of flawed design. Crew's perspective. My tank is inferior to the German one. That means I could die because of it. Command's perspective. We can afford tactical losses because quantity and logistics give us strategic advantage. This gap in perception bred frustration. Crews fought in machines they despised, yet those very machines became the tool that ultimately delivered victory. Technology paths. Innovation versus refinement. The Germans pinned their hopes on radical breakthroughs. Electric transmissions, periscopic sights, even infrared night vision gear. The Americans relied on proven systems, refined step by step. The Sherman M4 A3E8, Easy 8, the best modification of the series, received an improved 76mm M1A2 gun, HVSS horizontal suspension, thicker frontal armor, up to 76mm, an upgraded transmission. Each improvement was based on field experience with earlier models. While the Germans experimented with revolutionary technologies, the Americans perfected what already worked. Sergeant John Fury Collier, veteran of 4 Shermans. John Fury Collier from Oklahoma joined the 66th Tank Regiment in March 1943 at age 23. A car mechanic by trade, he thought he knew machines inside and out. 2 hours with a Sherman M4A1 shattered that illusion. This tank is a puzzle made from car parts, Collier joked. Engine from Ford, gearbox from Chrysler, armor thinner than a Cadillac's fender, and we're supposed to fight Germans in this? His first battle came on June 12, 1944, when his Sherman entered the French town of Villers-Bocage, where Michael Whitman waited in a Tiger I. We didn't even see where the first shot came from, Collier recalled. An 88mm shell sliced through the side armor like a hot knife through butter. The ammo lit up. We had 20 seconds to get out alive. 3 of the crew escaped. Radio operator Bill Trapper burned inside. Gunner Chuck Davis died on the way to a hospital. That day, Whitman destroyed 25 Shermans, 1 Tiger, against an entire company. A week later, Collier received another Sherman, again an M4A1, with a 75mm gun. There were no other options. I climbed into that coffin knowing the next meeting with a German tank could be my last, but the infantry was counting on us. On July 18th, near Caen, his tank was ambushed by a Panther hidden behind a ruined church. The first shot, from 800 meters, pierced the front armor. This time, we all got out, Collier said. But within 3 minutes, the tank burned to the ground. Panther shells worked like firebombs. His third Sherman, an M4A3 with a 76mm gun, gave him hope. Yes, the gun could penetrate a Panther's side from half a kilometer, but first you had to get that close alive. The Germans hit us accurately from a mile away. He lost his 4th Sherman on August 15th during the invasion of southern France, this time to an infantry Panzerfaust fired from a house window. The Faust patron cut through armor like a can opener, an 88mm shaped charge against 25mm of steel. Simple math. His 5th Sherman, an M4A3E8, Easy 8, he kept to the end of the war. The Easy 8 had new suspension that didn't break on every bump, a stronger gun with modern shells, thicker armor. But the real difference was that by then the Germans had few veteran crews left. Over the war, Collier destroyed 23 German tanks and assault guns, lost 4 Shermans, and was wounded 3 times. His verdict was blunt. The Sherman was weak in tank duels, but perfect for supporting infantry. And that's what we did 90% of the time. Lieutenant Charles Chuck White, the officer who lost his faith. Charles White graduated from Fort Knox as one of the top cadets. At 25, an MIT-trained mechanical engineer, he knew tank design theory better than some of his instructors. On paper, the Sherman looked respectable, he recalled. 40 kilometers per hour, up to 75mm of armor, a reliable gun. The statistics didn't lie, but they didn't tell the truth either. In March 1944, he arrived in Europe as a platoon commander in the 3rd Armored Division. On March 25 near Gaius, he fought his first battle. We advanced with 3 tanks in line, infantry covering behind. Out of the tree line burst a Panzer IV with a long-barreled gun. From 1,200 meters, it knocked out my right-hand Sherman. One shot and gone. White ordered his gunners to fire back, but the shells bounced harmlessly off the Germans' front armor. We fired accurately, but it was useless. The Panzer reloaded and took out the 2nd tank. I had no choice but to order a retreat. That day he grasped the central problem. The Sherman's 75mm gun was outdated. It had been designed in 1940 to fight early Panzer models. By 1944, even the Panzer IV carried thicker armor and the Kabuki 40 gun. We were fighting with 1940 weapons against 1943 machines. The outcome was obvious. In May, near Anzio, White encountered a Tiger I positioned on a ridge 1,800 meters away. The Tiger began methodically picking off my tanks. We couldn't even close the distance to effective range. Our shells fell short, while the German rounds landed with deadly precision. Of his 4 Shermans, only 2 survived. Crews had to be evacuated under fire. I filed a report on the Sherman's helplessness against heavy tanks. The answer was standard: use mass and artillery. But in June, in Normandy, he saw another side of the machine. German infantry were dug into hedgerows and stone houses. The Sherman with HE shells was perfect here. One shot and the machine gun nest vanished. A house collapsed in seconds. Over 1 month, his platoon destroyed 8 tanks, 23 guns, 47 machine gun nests, and about 300 enemy infantry. Losses: 3 Shermans knocked out, 1 burned completely. I realized the Sherman wasn't built for duels. It was built to smash enemy defenses, and in that role, it was flawless. By war's end, White had risen to major, commanding an entire Sherman battalion. His verdict was as blunt as Collier's. The Sherman was a bad tank for tankers, but a great tank for the Army. Sergeant Billy Texan Johnson, a simple soldier from Dallas. Billy Johnson joined the Army straight from a ranch outside Dallas at the age of 19. Strong-handed, used to farm machinery, and plain-spoken, the Army made him a driver-mechanic for the Sherman. The first thing that struck me about the Sherman was the noise, Johnson remembered. The Ford GAA engine roared like 1,000 tractors at once. At full throttle, we couldn't hear anything around us. In February 1944, he joined the 4th Armored Division. His machine, a Sherman M4A1, bore the name Dallas Belle, after the girl waiting for him back home. "I loved that tank from the first day," he said. "Simple, reliable, like an old Ford tractor. It could go anywhere and always got you where you needed to be." His first battle came on June 15, 1944, in Normandy, supporting the 22nd Infantry Regiment's assault on the village of La Haye-du-Puits. The Germans were holed up in stone houses with MG-42s. The infantry couldn't lift their heads. The commander ordered me to move closer and knock out the strong points. He drove the tank to within 100 meters of enemy positions. The 75mm gun tore through building after building. The Germans withdrew. That's when I understood what the Sherman was made for. Not fighting Tigers, smashing infantry and fortifications. In July, Dallas Belle faced its first Stug 3 assault gun. The Stug was hiding behind a barn. The first shot skimmed inches from our turret. The commander yelled, "Go, Texan, flank him!" I swung left, past the barn, and hit his side from 200 meters. One shell, and he burned. August brought harsher lessons. Near St. Lo, a Panther opened fire from 1,400 meters. I never even saw the flash. The round pierced the front plate. The commander and gunner died instantly. I crawled out through the lower hatch with the radio man. 3 days later, he was given a new Sherman M4A3. It was better than the last one, used less fuel, accelerated faster, had a stronger transmission. The Americans kept improving their tanks. By war's end, Johnson was driving his 4th Sherman, an M4A3E8 Easy 8. That was a different beast altogether. The 76mm gun could pierce a Panzer IV at a kilometer. The HVSS suspension stopped shaking our teeth out on every bump. The front armor was thicker. For the first time, I felt we had a real tank. In March 1945, during the crossing of the Rhine, his Easy 8 knocked out 2 Panzer IVs and a Pak 40 gun. By the end, the Germans had lost their veteran crews. Their machines were still deadly, but the men inside were green. While we'd gained experience, after the war, Johnson returned to Texas and opened an auto repair shop. On the office wall hung a photograph of his 4th Sherman, captioned, "The best tractor I ever drove." Captain Robert Bob Cole, the company commander who saw the bigger picture. Robert Cole graduated from West Point in 1941. He had excellent theoretical training and hands-on command experience, from platoon to company level. For him, the Sherman was never just a single machine, it was part of a larger military system. A tanker only sees his own Sherman, he explained. A company commander sees 17, their coordination, tactics, and logistics. For me, the Sherman was a tool in the Army's hand. In May 1944, Cole took command of a company in the 2nd Armored Division, preparing his men for the Normandy invasion. I quickly realized the Sherman's greatest advantage: standardization. All 17 of my tanks had identical engines, guns, and transmissions. That made training and repairs far simpler. On June 6th, his company landed on Omaha Beach in the 2nd wave. Shermans fitted with duplex drive systems were meant to swim ashore. Only 9 of the 17 made it to land. The rest sank in the storm. But the survivors immediately supported the infantry and helped break the fortifications. In combat, Cole saw what mattered most: the Sherman's reliability and rapid deployment. The Tiger or Panther were stronger in a duel, but they broke down, guzzled fuel, and needed long repairs. The Sherman ran like a Swiss watch. In July, near Villers-Bocage, Cole's company faced 8 German tanks, 3 Tigers, 4 Panzer IVs, and 1 Panther. On paper, the Germans looked superior, but we had numbers and tactics. I split my company into 3 groups. One attacked frontally, the other 2 flanked. We surrounded them and fired from 3 directions. A Tiger can't shoot 3 ways at once. They lost 6 Shermans, but destroyed all of the enemy armor. By August, his company received the new Sherman M4A3S. Every few months, the Sherman got better. American industry constantly absorbed lessons from the front and upgraded the design. By the end of the war, Cole's company had destroyed 89 German tanks and assault guns, losing 34 Shermans of their own. The kill ratio in machines was 1 to 2.6 against them, but in manpower, the ratio was 1 to 4.2 in their favor. The Sherman saved crews. Its tall silhouette and roomy interior gave men a chance to bail out alive. German crews often died with their tanks. Ours often lived to fight another day. His conclusion was straightforward. The Sherman didn't win because it was the best tank. It won because it was the best system. Technical Sergeant Mike O'Meary, the mechanic who knew every bolt. Mike O'Meary served in the 735th Tank Battalion, responsible for keeping Shermans running. An Irishman from Boston, he had grown up in his father's garage, pulling apart and rebuilding engines since boyhood. The Sherman was like a giant Ford, he recalled. Simple, straightforward, reliable. You could fix it with ordinary tools. Anyone with basic skills could keep it going. Over 3 years of war, he serviced 53 different Shermans. He knew every strength and every weakness. The biggest problem on the early models was the transmission drive shaft. It usually failed after about 800 kilometers. But on the M4A3, they replaced it with a gear drive far more dependable. The Sherman's simplicity meant repairs could be done right on the battlefield. O'Meary himself set a record swapping an engine in 4 hours and 20 minutes in field conditions. German tanks were far more complicated. The Tiger had over 700 types of bolts, the Sherman about 200. You tell me, which is easier to repair? O'Meary even devised his own system of preventative maintenance, nearly doubling engine lifespan. The Americans built a tank that even the simplest mechanic could repair. And that wasn't an insult, that was the highest compliment, he said proudly. To understand why the Sherman was both hated and respected, one must look closely at its design. Unlike German tanks, engineered as pinnacles of technical mastery, the Sherman was conceived from the start as an industrial product. Not a masterpiece for showcase duels, but a machine that could be mass-produced and easily maintained. Key Sherman variants. M4, 1942. The baseline model, powered by the Continental R975 gasoline engine, with a welded hull and 75mm M1A1 gun. Weight, 30.3 tons. Top speed, 38 km per hour. M4A1 1942. Featured a cast hull instead of welded, giving smoother ballistic contours. Same engine and gun. Weight increased to 30.8 tons. M4A2 1942. Equipped with the General Motors 6046 diesel engine, more economical and less fire-prone, but weaker in output. Most went to Allies under Lend-Lease. M4A3 1943. Fitted with the new Ford GAA V8, producing 450 horsepower. The most reliable and best-performing power plant of the series. This model became the favorite of American crews. M4A3E8, Easy 8, 1944. The final and most advanced version, with horizontal HVSS suspension, the 76mm M1A2 gun, and frontal armor increased to 76mm. It balanced mobility, firepower, and survivability. Thus, the Sherman's evolution reflects the American approach. Not to build the perfect machine all at once, but to refine a mass production base step by step, adapting it to battlefield needs. It was engineering by compromise, yet that very compromise produced a tank that fought from 1942 until the war's end and remained in service for decades after. July 1944, Normandy. Operation Cobra became the turning point in redefining the Sherman's role on the battlefield. General Omar Bradley planned to break through the German defenses with 1,500 Shermans supported by 3,000 bombers. The Germans had constructed a deeply layered defensive line around Saint-Lô, trenches, bunkers, anti-tank guns concealed in the thick Norman hedgerows. Every hedge and stone wall became a miniature fortress. Major James Airhugh, commander of the 3rd Tank Battalion of the 3rd Armored Division, was assigned a 2-kilometer sector. "We're not facing tanks but fortified infantry," he reported. The Sherman was built for this. A single 75mm high-explosive shell and a bunker is nothing but rubble. On July 25th at 11 o'clock, American artillery opened fire. For an hour, 1,500 guns pounded the German positions. At noon, the Shermans advanced. First echelon, 47 M4A1, stormed the front, blasting machine gun nests and anti-tank guns hidden in the hedgerows. Second echelon, 63 M4A, 3S pushed deeper, clearing German infantry from the rear defenses. Third echelon provided direct support to the advancing U.S. infantry. "We rolled up to each hedgerow to within 50 meters and fired point blank," recalled Sergeant Harry Ducombe of the Sherman Fury. 3 shells and the enemy position was gone. After 6 hours of fighting, the Americans had advanced 8 kilometers. Losses: 23 Shermans destroyed, 41 damaged. German losses: 2,400 infantry, 89 anti-tank guns, and 156 machine gun nests. The Sherman proved itself the perfect infantry support tank, Bradley concluded. It was never built to duel Tigers, but it was built to smash through defenses. December 1944. The German counteroffensive in the Ardennes caught the Allies off guard. Shermans now faced Germany's finest tanks, and in the harshest winter conditions. Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams, later to become U.S. commander in Vietnam, led the 37th Tank Battalion of the 4th Armored Division, with 72 Shermans of various models. On December 19th, near Stommel, he clashed with Kampfgruppe Piper, 20 Shermans against 28 German tanks, including 8 Tigers and 12 Panthers. It was a classic meeting engagement, Abrams recalled. No advantage in terrain, no surprise. A straight tank duel in open ground. Abrams used swarm tactics, Shermans attacking from multiple directions at once, forcing the Germans to split their fire. A Tiger can knock out any of my tanks with one shot, he admitted. But even a Tiger can't fire at 8 targets at the same time. The battle lasted 2 hours and 40 minutes. The result? 17 Shermans destroyed, 8 damaged. German losses: 12 tanks destroyed and 6 damaged, including 3 Tigers and 5 Panthers. Yes, we lost more machines, Abrams analyzed. But strategically we won. Kampfgruppe Piper lost its striking power and failed its mission. March 1945. Operation Plunder. The Allies prepared to cross the Rhine near Wessel. The Germans had blown every bridge. Tanks had to cross on pontoons. Colonel John Held commanded the 14th Tank Group, tasked with the crossing. Here, another Sherman advantage became clear. The M4A3 weighed around 30 tons, exactly the limit of a standard pontoon. By contrast, the Tiger I at 57 tons and the Panther at 45 tons required custom-built bridges. We ferried them one by one, Held recalled. In 18 hours we moved 156 Shermans across. A Tiger or Panther simply couldn't have made it. On the eastern bank, the Shermans met the last organized resistance of the Wehrmacht. The primary threat came from Panzerfausts and Panzerschrecks. Survival statistics revealed a surprising edge for the Sherman. Crew survival after a Panzerfaust hit: 67%. Crew survival in a Tiger after penetration: 43%. The reason lay in the Sherman's wider hatches and roomier crew compartment, giving men precious seconds to escape. The Pacific Theater. Shermans against Japanese tactics. While Europe decided the fate of Germany, other Shermans fought in the Pacific. The enemy here was entirely different. The Japanese had few tanks, but their island defenses were uniquely formidable. Colonel Stuart Tank, commanding the 763rd Tank Battalion, led 48 Shermans in the February 1945 assault on Iwo Jima. The Japanese had turned the island into one vast fortress, he remembered. Every cave, every rock was a firing point. The Sherman became our mobile pillbox. Japan's anti-tank defenses included 47mm Type 1 guns, 75mm Type 90 guns hidden in caves, kamikaze sappers armed with magnetic mines. In these brutal conditions, the Sherman proved 3 decisive qualities: durability in the humid tropical climate, ease of field maintenance, effectiveness of its 75mm HE shells against concrete and rock fortifications. In 36 days of battle on Iwo Jima, Shermans destroyed 347 Japanese strongpoints. U.S. losses: 9 Shermans destroyed, 23 damaged, but every damaged tank was repaired in the field. Statistical analysis of Sherman effectiveness. European Theater, June 1944, May 1945. 42,608 Shermans took part in combat. 8,134 lost permanently. Survivability rate: 81%. Average life cycle of a Sherman: about 4.2 months of active combat. Destroyed enemy targets. 2,347 German tanks and assault guns. 8,932 anti-tank guns. 23,456 machine gun nests. 5,621 artillery positions. About 87,000 enemy infantry. Enemy losses comparison. Tiger 1, 1,347 built. 1,209 lost, 90%. Panther, 5,976 built, 5,234 lost, 88%. 49,234 built, 11,567 lost, 23%. Evolution of U.S. armored tactics. 1942 to 1943. Learning phase. First engagements copied British practice. Shermans were used as cavalry, breakthrough, and pursuit. 1944. Specialization. Roles split. Tank destroyers, M10, M36, handled tank versus tank duels, while Shermans remained the all-purpose support vehicle. 1945. Mastery. Americans refined combined arms tactics. Tanks working with infantry, artillery, and air support as one unified strike force. Key tactical innovations. Rhino hedgerow cutters. Shermans fitted with steel tusks that cut through. Normandy's bocage, breaking fortified lines without heavy losses. Calliope rocket Shermans. T-34 launchers mounted on the turret, firing 60 rockets in a single salvo, devastating an area the size of a football field. Dozer Shermans. Engineering variants with bulldozer blades, clearing debris, building passages, and opening routes for the advance. Flamethrower Shermans. Armed with M4 flamethrowers, they incinerated bunkers and caves in the Pacific campaigns. May 1945. Nuremberg Airfield. Hundreds of Shermans stood lined up. The war in Europe was over. Before them stood General George S. Patton, commander of the U.S. Third Army, which had marched from Normandy to Czechoslovakia, crushing 11 German armies. "This tank won the war for us," he declared, pointing at a battered M4A3E8, not because it was the best in a duel, but because it was the best for war. Patton saw the Sherman paradox more clearly than most. As a cavalryman of the old school, he valued speed and maneuver over sheer armor thickness or gun caliber. "The Germans built tanks for tankers. We built a tank for the army," he said. The Sherman was not the best tank of the war, but it was the best tank for victory. The fate of Sherman veterans. Sergeant John Fury Collier returned to Oklahoma in autumn 1945. In his auto shop, he hung a photo of his 5th Sherman, the only one he had driven to the end of the war. "People often asked if I hated that tank," he told his grandchildren. "Yes, I hated it, but I respected it too. The Sherman saved my life even though it could have taken it. It was a strange bond." Until his death, Collier kept a 75mm shell casing engraved with his crew's names. On the brass was carved, "For those who never came back." The Sherman became the ancestor of all modern main battle tanks. The principles embedded in its design remain relevant today. Standardization. Interchangeable parts for mass production and repair. Modularity upgrades possible without replacing the whole vehicle. Versatility. Ability to perform multiple battlefield roles. Reliability, simplicity, valued above engineering perfection in isolated subsystems. A lesson for the present. The story of the Sherman is a warning against military perfectionism. Germany built ideal, but costly machines. America chose mass-produced, simple, repairable tanks, and those won the war. The Tiger I was an engineering masterpiece. The Sherman was a workhorse, but victory came not from the brilliance of a few, but from the efficiency of the system. The same dilemma. Few perfect weapons, versus many reliable ones confronts armies even today. The greatest irony is that the tank its crews called a steel coffin became the symbol of unprisoned American victory. Today, Shermans stand in town squares as monuments, proof that the best technically is not always the best strategically. German crews took pride in the Tiger's strength. American tankers cursed the Shermans' weaknesses. But it was precisely those weaknesses, compromise, simplicity, mass production, that gave the Allies decisive superiority. By May 1945, when the last Sherman left the battlefield, the era of classical armored warfare had ended. 49,234 Shermans versus 1,347 Tigers. It was not just a clash of machines, but a clash of philosophies. The Americans proved victory belongs not to the side with the better machine, but to the ender side that best understands the very nature of war. The Sherman was never the strongest, the tank of World War II, but it was the tank that won the war. And therein lies the paradox of the American way. Winning not through perfection, but through effectiveness. Not with the elegance of a single masterpiece, but with the strength of an entire system. Not with art, but with science. The Sherman was hated, but it prevailed. And in the end, that was enough.
December 16th, 1944, 5:30 a.m. The Ardennes forests lay wrapped in pre-dawn mist when German soldier Hans Müller of the 12th SS Panzer Division, Hitlerjugend, climbed out of his trench to check his MG-42. For the past 3 days, the Americans had fired almost nothing, a strange silence after months of constant fighting. Suddenly, the air was split by a whistle, one shell, then another. Within seconds, a dozen. A heartbeat later, 100. And then the sky simply tore apart. 4,752 shells in the first 4 minutes. That's 1,188 shells per minute, nearly 20 shells every second. The ground shook as if struck by a magnitude 6 earthquake. Hans Müller would never rise from that trench again. This was American artillery in action, a death machine the Germans simply could not comprehend. World War II forever changed the nature of warfare. But the most dramatic transformation was the role of artillery. If in World War I, artillery had been the god of war, the Americans turned it into an almighty deity. German soldiers, hardened in Poland, France, and Operation Barbarossa, saw themselves as the most experienced fighters in the world. They knew all about the Soviet Katyusha, the British 25-pounders, and French artillery left over from 1918. But when they first encountered American artillery in North Africa in late 1942, and later in Italy and France, their world was turned upside down. The Americans didn't just have more guns. They developed a whole philosophy of artillery warfare built on 3 principles: speed, accuracy, and overwhelming firepower. And once this system was unleashed at full force, the results were devastating. This is the story of how America's industrial might reshaped the face of war, and why hardened German veterans, unafraid of tanks or aircraft, came to dread American artillery. October the 23rd, 1942, North Africa, near El Alamein. Feldwebel Erich Steiner of the 15th Panzer Division, Africa Corps, peered through his binoculars at British positions. 3 days earlier, the first American units had arrived at the front, the 1st Infantry Division, which the British nicknamed the Big Red One. Steiner had fought in Africa for a year. He knew British tactics by heart: long artillery barrages, methodical advances, predictable maneuvers. The Germans had adapted, digging deeper trenches, building stronger bunkers, waiting out the shelling, then counterattacking. But today was different. At 2:30 p.m., the barrage began, but not like usual. The shells didn't fall randomly. Each strike was precise, each explosion deliberate. In the first 15 minutes, American artillery fired 3,200 shells. That was 3 times more than the British usually used in an entire hour. But the terrifying part wasn't the volume. The shells followed a system, first wiping out observation posts, then command centers, then communication lines. Steiner hid in his dugout, counting the shells. After 20 minutes, he lost track. After 30, the earth beneath him began to crack. After 40, he realized. This wasn't just shelling, it was a destruction system. The Americans were using a new tactic they called time on target. Every battery calculated flight times so that all shells landed simultaneously. The effect was horrific. The enemy had no time to take cover after the first warning whistle. That day, Steiner lost half his company, but it was only the beginning. The Americans were just warming up. 2 weeks later, during Operation Torch, American gunners unveiled another innovation, the 240mm M1 howitzer, nicknamed Black Eva, the most powerful field gun in the world. A single shell, weighing 163 kilograms, left a crater 15 meters wide and 4 meters deep. When Germans first saw the aftermath, they thought it was an air bomb. The worst part? The Americans had hundreds of these monsters, and tens of thousands of tons of ammunition for them. To understand why the Germans were so stunned by American artillery, you have to look at the numbers. In 1943, at the height of production, American factories were turning out 5,000 artillery shells per day. Per day. That meant a new shell rolled off the assembly line every 17 seconds. The Chrysler plant in Detroit, which had once produced cars, was repurposed to build M4 Sherman tanks. But lesser known, the same plant also produced shells for the 75mm guns, 12,000 per day. Ford's River Rouge plant became a colossal ammunition factory. A 3-kilometer conveyor line stamped shell casings at a pace of 1 every 15 seconds. Most workers were women, with the men away at the front who proudly called themselves munition girls. Rosie Monroe, a 23-year-old from Kentucky, set a record. In one 8-hour shift, she produced 847 shell casings. Her photo, wearing a red bandana, became the symbol of America's war industry. But shell production was only half the story. The Americans also revolutionized logistics. Their ammunition delivery system was so efficient the Germans simply couldn't believe it. Liberty ships, cargo vessels built at a rate of 3 per week, carried ammunition to Europe by the thousands of tons. Each ship could haul 10,000 tons of cargo, about 65,000 rounds of 155mm shells. On shore, the ammunition was loaded onto special trains. The Americans built 15,000 kilometers of new railway in Europe, just for artillery needs. Trains ran with Swiss watch precision. Every 20 minutes, another convoy of shells rolled toward the front. The system was so efficient that American artillery never, not once in the entire war, ran out of ammunition. Meanwhile, German gunners often had only 10 to 15 shells per gun per day. The result? An American gunner could fire at will. A German gunner had to count every round. Colonel Hans von Luck of the 21st Panzer Division later wrote in his memoirs, "We learned to treasure shells like gold. The Americans fired as if they grew on trees. Perhaps for them, they did. But the most shocking part was how the Americans organized the fire itself. They built a system that allowed hundreds of guns to concentrate fire on a single target within minutes." March 14, 1944, Italy, near the town of Cassino. American Lieutenant James O'Brien of the 34th Infantry Division crept through the ruins of an ancient monastery. In his hands he carried not a rifle, but a SCR 610 radio. Weight, 15 kilograms. Range, 25 kilometers. O'Brien was a forward observer. His task was to locate German positions and call down artillery fire. But he did it differently than his British or Soviet counterparts. Through the radio, O'Brien did not speak to a single battery. He contacted the division's fire direction center. There sat Captain William Schmidt, a former accountant from Chicago, who, before the war, had never seen a gun up close except in the movies. But Schmidt possessed something far more powerful than battlefield experience. He had firing tables calculated with mechanical computing machines. He had detailed maps with coordinates for every tree, and he had the ability to coordinate the fire of 48 guns at once. "Observer requests fire," O'Brien said into the radio. "Coordinates 892347. German infantry in trenches. Request immediate fire." Schmidt studied the map. He pressed the button on his set and spoke. "All batteries. Target number 47. Coordinates 892347. Ammunition, high explosive. fuse, point detonating, range 8,200 meters, elevation 312 mils, full charge, 1 round each, time on target 14:23:30. Execute. What happened next, the Germans would call the American miracle. Within 45 seconds, 48 shells struck the German positions simultaneously. Not a second earlier, not a second later. The psychological effect was as great as the physical one. German soldiers were used to barrages starting slowly. One shell, then adjustments, then a few more, and finally massed fire. They had time to dive for cover. The American time-on-target system robbed them of that time. The first shell was also the last. There was no warning whistle, only sudden death from the sky. The secret lay in radio communication and centralized control. Every American division had its own fire direction center, equipped with the latest radio gear. Operators could coordinate all divisional artillery simultaneously. Even more, the Americans created a system of interdivision cooperation. If the situation demanded overwhelming fire, the fire direction centers of several divisions could combine their efforts. On June 9, 1944, during Operation Overlord, the Americans demonstrated the most stunning example of this coordination. 1,296 guns from 7 divisions opened fire on German positions along the Normandy coast. In the first 20 minutes, they fired 18,000 shells. That's 15 shells every second, without pause, for 20 straight minutes. German soldier Wilfried Stobe of the 352nd Infantry Division, who survived that barrage, later recalled, "It felt as if the sky itself had shattered and was falling on us. The noise was so great that blood ran from my ears. The earth leapt like a living creature. I thought the end of the world had come." The true secret of American artillery was not the number of guns nor the number of shells. The true secret was mathematics. As early as 1941, before the U.S. even entered the war, a group of mathematicians and engineers worked at the artillery school in Fort Sill, Oklahoma, under Colonel Orlando Ward. Their mission sounded simple: make American artillery the most accurate in the world. Ward understood that war had changed. Static trenches of the First World War were gone. Battles were mobile, targets moved, and there was little time for calculations. A system was needed that could deliver rapid, precise fire on any target. Ward's team created something revolutionary: graphical firing tables. Previously, artillerymen used complex formulas to calculate trajectories, a process that took 10 to 15 minutes. The American tables produced the same result in 30 seconds, but that was only half the revolution. The other half was standardization. The Americans developed a unified coordinate system, usable in every theater. Every map point had a 6-digit code. Every target type had its number. Every shell type had its own code. The result? An American forward observer could call fire with a single phrase: "Fire mission, target AB 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Personnel in open. HE quick. Fire for effect." And within 2 to 3 minutes, the target was destroyed. By comparison, German gunners needed 15 to 20 minutes to gather coordinates, check them, calculate settings, and transmit orders. Most impressive of all was the American method of fire adjustment. Traditionally, artillery fired a ranging shot, observed, corrected, and fired again, a process that could take hours. The Americans invented the bracket method. They fired 4 spotting shells at once. 1 aimed at the calculated center, 3 around it. The observer simply chose the closest shot and gave the corrected settings for full fire. The entire process, from spotting the target to its destruction, took 3 to 4 minutes, 5 to 6 times faster than any other army. July 25, 1944. Operation Cobra, the breakout from the Normandy beachhead. The Americans prepared the most powerful artillery strike in history. The goal? Smash German defenses along a front only 7 kilometers wide. 914 guns from 105 millimeters to 240 millimeters. 1,800 tons of shells. 60 minutes of unbroken fire. But the most shocking element was the precision. The Americans calculated everything to the centimeter. Each gun knew its exact sector. Each shell had its assigned target. No random area bombardment, only surgical destruction. The results exceeded all expectations. In 1 hour, the Germans lost 70% of their men and equipment in the breakthrough zone. More importantly, they lost the ability to resist. Soldiers fled, abandoning their weapons. General Fritz Bayerlein, commander of the Panzer Lehr Division, caught in the barrage, later wrote, "My division was literally ground to dust. I lost 70 tanks without firing a single shot in reply. This was not a battle, it was a slaughter." Among all American artillery pieces, one stood supreme, the 155mm M14 howitzer. The Germans called it the American hammer. U.S. soldiers called it the Long Tom. Barrel length, 7 meters. Shell weight, 43 kilograms. Maximum range, 23 kilometers. Rate of fire, 4 rounds per minute. That may not sound like much, but the Long Tom had one unique advantage: phenomenal accuracy. At 15 kilometers, American gunners could hit a house-sized target with the very first shot. This was thanks not only to the gun's superb design, but also to the perfection of its ammunition. American shells were manufactured with near-joule precision. Weight variation did not exceed 0.1%. Powder charges were distributed with absolute uniformity. Fuses detonated with an accuracy of 0.01 seconds. The result? American shell groupings were 3 to 4 times tighter than German equivalents. But the Long Tom was not the most powerful U.S. gun. That title belonged to the 240mm M1 howitzer, Black Eva, shell weight 163 kilograms, range 23 kilometers, blast force equivalent to 75 kilograms of TNT. When Black Eva fired, the ground shook within a 5-kilometer radius. The shot could be heard 50 kilometers away. The explosion left a crater the size of a 2-story house. The Germans dreaded these monsters. A single Black Eva round could obliterate any field fortification. A 2-meter-thick concrete bunker was pierced clean through. A tank became twisted scrap. Most terrifying was the psychological effect. When Black Eva roared, panic swept entire units. Soldiers fled, abandoning positions even if shells landed hundreds of meters away. September 18th, 1944. The battle for Aachen, the first German city assaulted by the Americans. The Germans had turned every house into a fortress, every street into a defensive line. They planned to hold for months. The Americans rolled in their artillery, 16 Black Evas, 48 Long Toms, and 96 standard 105mm howitzers. In 3 days, they fired 18,000 shells into the city. The result was catastrophic. Aachen's medieval center ceased to exist. Its 700-year-old Gothic cathedral lay in ruins. But most importantly, German defenses collapsed. SS Obersturmbannführer Gerhard Engel, commanding Aachen's defense, wrote in his report, "The enemy uses artillery as a tactical weapon. They can annihilate any of our positions within minutes. Holding the line under such conditions is impossible. Yet the Americans still had another weapon that filled the Germans with dread: rocket artillery. The 4.5-inch rocket launcher M12 Calliope. The official designation sounded dull, but the soldiers had another name: Screaming Mimi, and the name fit perfectly. The Calliope was 60 rocket tubes mounted on a Sherman tank chassis. In 30 seconds, it could unleash all 60 rockets. Maximum range, 4 kilometers. Warhead weight, 18 kilograms. But the real power wasn't in the destructive force of each rocket. It was in the psychological effect. When the Calliope fired, its rockets flew with a distinctive wailing sound, audible for 10 kilometers. The Germans called it the voice of death. One Calliope could saturate an area the size of a football field in a single minute, and the Americans rarely used them alone. Batteries of 12 to 16 launchers were standard. February 12, 1945. The attack across the Roer River. The U.S. 2nd Armored Division advanced against the fortified positions of the German 9th Panzer Division. The Germans held strong positions on the high ground and were prepared to repel the assault. The Americans brought up 18 Calliopes. At 2:30 p.m., they fired in unison. In 2 minutes, 1,080 rockets rained down on German positions. The roar was so violent that glass instruments shattered inside American tanks waiting 2 kilometers behind. The Germans simply lost the will to resist. Most dropped their weapons and fled before the infantry attack even began. Sergeant Wilhelm Peters of the 9th Panzer Division later recalled, "It was like the end of the world. The sky was burning, the earth was leaping, and that sound, I still hear it at night, like 1,000 demons screaming at once." But rocket artillery was only one tool in the American firepower system. The real strength lay in the combination of different guns coordinated together. A typical American division had 54 howitzers of 105 millimeters for direct infantry support, 12 guns of 155 millimeters for smashing fortifications, 12 anti-tank guns of 76 millimeters, 6 Calliope rocket launchers, plus the option to call on corps-level artillery, up to 240 millimeter howitzers. Together, this meant the ability to fire up to 2,000 shells per minute. For comparison, a typical German division in late 1944 had only 30 to 40 guns. With ammunition for just 2 to 3 days of fighting, the result was inevitable. American artillery dominated the battlefield completely. The most modern weapons are useless if you don't know where to aim. The Americans understood this better than anyone and built the most advanced artillery reconnaissance system in the world. The foundation of this system was the forward observers, FOs. They were the eyes of American artillery, and on their work depended the success of entire operations. Every FO went through a 16-week training course at Fort Sill. They learned not just how to call fire, but how to identify targets, evaluate priority, and calculate the most effective method of destruction. Lieutenant Robert Palmer of the 1st Infantry Division was one of the best observers in the European theater. In 11 months of combat, he called artillery fire 847 times, and not once missed his target. Among the infantry, he earned the nickname God's Hammer. Palmer had a unique method of observation. Instead of seeking isolated targets, he studied the enemy's behavioral patterns. Where did the Germans place their command posts? How did they organize supply lines? What routes did they use for reserves? January 15th, 1945. The Ardennes Offensive. Palmer observed German positions from the church steeple in the village of St. Vith. Through binoculars, he noticed something odd. Motorcyclists shuttling constantly behind the forest, too frequent for ordinary reconnaissance. Palmer analyzed. The riders moved between 3 points, likely hidden command posts. He called artillery on all 3 simultaneously. The results were staggering. Palmer had struck the headquarters of an entire German corps. 15 officers were killed, including Corps Commander Lieutenant General Willibald Borkmann. German defenses in that sector collapsed within a day. But observers were only part of the system. The Americans also employed cutting-edge technology, radar to locate enemy artillery. The ANTPQ-3 Firefinder radar could detect a German gun's firing position within 15 seconds of its shot. The system automatically calculated coordinates and sent them to U.S. batteries. From detection to destruction, less than 4 minutes. This was revolutionary. Before radar, counter-battery fire was guesswork and luck. Now it became exact science. March 23, 1945. The crossing of the Rhine. The Germans massed 340 guns on the eastern bank, planning to annihilate the Americans as they crossed. But U.S. radars picked them up before they fired. In 20 minutes, American counter-battery artillery destroyed 287 of those guns. Only 53 remained. German artillery commander General Kurt Dittmar wrote in his report, "The enemy possesses abilities that border on magic. They know the positions of our guns better than we do ourselves." To grasp the scale of American artillery power, one must look at production figures. During the war, U.S. industry produced 4.2 billion shells of all calibers. That's 11.5 million shells every day. For the entire war, laid end to end, they would stretch from New York to Los Angeles and back 3 times. Total weight, 6.8 million tons, equivalent to 340 Baltimore-class cruisers. Even more impressive was efficiency. In 1942, making a 155mm shell required 45 minutes of labor. By 1944, the time was reduced to 12 minutes. The Americans literally put death on an assembly line. The General Electric plant in Schenectady became the largest ammunition factory in the world. Workshop area. 2.3 square kilometers. Workforce, 47,000. Daily output, 50,000 shells. Ann Miller, a shift supervisor at GE, set an absolute productivity record. In a 12-hour shift, her team produced 2,847 105mm shells, one shell every 15 seconds, without pause. But shell production was only part of the military machine. Guns themselves were built in parallel. During the war, U.S. spree factories turned out 8,742 howitzers of 105 millimeters, 4,035 guns of 155 millimeters, 315 howitzers of 240 millimeters, plus thousands of smaller guns and mortars. For comparison, Germany produced only 3,200 artillery pieces of all calibers across the entire war. Most remarkable of all was the Chrysler plant in Warren, Michigan. Before the war, it assembled Plymouth cars. By 1943, it was fully converted to producing tanks and artillery. The main production line stretched 1.8 kilometers. At one end, raw steel sheets. At the other, finished M101 105mm howitzers. Production time for one gun, 8 hours, 20 minutes. Walter Reuther, head of the Auto Workers Union, described the atmosphere. People worked like the possessed. They knew, every gun we build today will save lives of our boys in Europe tomorrow. The results of this dedication were astonishing. By late 1944, the U.S. Army had the most powerful artillery in the world, not only in numbers, but in quality, accuracy, and firepower. General George Patton, commander of the U.S. Third Army, said a phrase that became legendary. Artillery is the god of war, and American artillery is God Almighty himself. December the 16th, 1944. The last great German offensive in the West began. The Battle of the Ardennes, what the Americans called the Battle of the Bulge. Hitler staked everything on this operation. 200,000 men, 340 tanks, the last reserves of the Luftwaffe. For the first 3 days, fortune favored the Germans. Dense fog grounded American aircraft. The surprise attack allowed breakthroughs along several sectors. For a moment, it seemed Hitler's gamble was working. But on December 19th, the skies cleared, and American artillery revealed its full power. General George Patton received orders to turn his entire Third Army north and strike the Germans. He had 48 hours to redeploy 133,000 men and 800 vehicles. Any other army would have taken weeks. The Americans did it in 36 hours, and artillery made it possible. Patton had 432 guns of all calibers, and, most importantly, unlimited ammunition. While his infantry and armor marched north, his artillery paved their way. On December 22nd, the Third Army struck the 5th Panzer Army near Bastogne. The Germans expected the usual slow, methodical assault. Instead, they were engulfed by an artillery hurricane. All 432 guns opened up at once. In the first 30 minutes, they fired 12,000 shells. That's 400 shells a minute, nearly 7 shells every second. SS Obersturmbannführer Joachim Peiper, commander of Kampfgruppe Peiper, described it. The earth became hell. Explosions everywhere, death everywhere. My tanks burned like candles. My soldiers went mad with terror. In half an hour, I lost half my men. But the Americans were not finished. They employed a new tactic, the rolling barrage. Artillery fire moved across the battlefield like a giant steamroller, crushing everything in its path. First the German front lines, then the second, then the third. As the fire shifted forward, American infantry and tanks advanced immediately behind it, storming positions that had been shattered seconds earlier. The effect was devastating. Germans barely had time to lift their heads before American tanks were upon them. Resistance was weak, chaotic, and short-lived. In just 8 hours, Patton's Third Army smashed through 15 kilometers of German defenses. American losses, 340 men. German losses, 8,000 killed and wounded, plus 150 tanks and assault guns. General Heinz Guderian, inspector of panzer troops, later admitted, "American artillery turned our offensive into suicide. In the Ardennes, we lost our last reserves. From that moment, the war was lost." One of the Germans' worst nightmares came from American anti-aircraft guns turned against ground targets. The 90mm M1, originally built to shoot down aircraft, proved deadly against tanks and bunkers. Barrel length, 4.7 meters. Shell weight, 10.9 kilograms. Muzzle velocity, 823 meters per second. At 2 kilometers, it could pierce 150 millimeters of armor, more than the famous German Tiger I. But the real terror was mass deployment. A typical US AA battery had 4 M1 guns. Each division had 3 to 4 such batteries. February 8, 1945, the assault on the Siegfried Line. The U.S. 9th Infantry Division attacked German bunkers near Prüm. Each bunker had 1-meter-thick concrete walls. The Americans brought up 90mm guns and fired directly. The shells punched through concrete like paper. In 2 hours, 16 OSA guns destroyed 47 bunkers. But the most terrifying were the paired 40mm Bofors guns. Designed for dive bombers, they proved horrific against infantry. Rate of fire, 120 rounds per barrel per minute. In twin mounts, 240 rounds per minute. Each 900-gram shell, with contact fuse, turned men into pulp. March 25, 1945. The crossing of the Rhine near Mainz. The U.S. 5th Infantry Division paddled across in assault boats. German machine guns and mortars tore into them. Then, American Bofors opened fire from the West Bank. In 20 minutes, they fired 4,800 shells. German defenses were obliterated. SS Untersturmführer Heinrich Schulze, captured afterwards, said, "This wasn't firing. It was a meat grinder. Shells rained down like water. If you didn't find cover in the first 30 seconds, you were dead." Most innovative was the use of air bursts. Americans set fuses to detonate above German trenches. The effect was horrifying. Shards rained down at 45 degrees, slicing through any cover. Trenches became death traps. The Germans called it the rain of death. The problem was, they had no answer. Their counter-battery radars were primitive. The Luftwaffe rarely flew. Their artillery had too few shells. The result? Total American dominance. They dictated the battle. The Germans could only endure and pray to survive. The deadliest weapon of American artillery wasn't steel or explosives. It was fear. The psychological impact of unrelenting barrages broke German soldiers long before the shells did. Dr. Werner Sterlitz, a Wehrmacht psychiatrist, studied soldiers late in 1944. Results were shocking. 78% showed signs of what was then called war neurosis. Today, PTSD. Symptoms: insomnia, uncontrollable shaking, panic attacks at the sound of shells or planes, total loss of morale. Many dropped their weapons and surrendered the moment they heard the whistle of incoming fire. Sergeant Kurt Becker of the 276th Infantry Division recalled, "When the Americans started firing, I lost control. My hands shook so badly I couldn't hold my rifle. It felt like the earth wanted to swallow me. I wished for only one thing, that it would stop." The Americans quickly realized the psychological power of their guns, and used it deliberately. They developed harassment fire, short, intense bursts at irregular intervals. The aim was not to kill, but to torment. Germans couldn't adapt. They never knew when the next strike would come. The stress built until men broke. January 14th, 1945. The 212th German Infantry Division in Alsace. At 6 a.m., U.S. guns opened for 5 minutes. Silence for 37 minutes. Then 9 minutes of fire. Then 23 minutes of silence. The intervals were random. Germans couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't even relieve themselves without fear. They listened constantly for the next whistle of death. After 3 days of this therapy, 40% of the division was combat ineffective, not from wounds, but nervous collapse. Divisional Commander Major General Hans von Obstfelder begged to withdraw his men. But worst of all were the night barrages. At 2 or 3 a.m., when the human body is weakest, the Americans struck. Airburst shells lit up the sky with ghastly fireworks. Calliope rockets screamed like demons. Floodlights blinded and disoriented. Egbert Stahl, a veteran of the 17th SS Panzer Grenadier Division, later said, "The night barrages were the worst. You lay in the trench, hearing whistles, seeing flashes, and it felt like you were in hell. Many went insane. Some screamed uncontrollably and never stopped. The psychological collapse was so severe that entire units lost combat effectiveness before the infantry even attacked. Soldiers deserted or surrendered en masse at the first chance. April 16, 1945. The last great artillery symphony of World War II in Europe began, the Battle of Berlin. The Red Army prepared for its final storming of the Nazi capital, and the Americans decided to contribute their part to this overture of death. Although U.S. ground forces did not take part in the assault on Berlin, their artillery thundered at full strength, supporting their Soviet allies. The 240mm Black Eva howitzers, positioned 40 kilometers from the city, methodically smashed German defenses. The most dramatic moment came on April 25th, when American and Soviet forces met at the Elbe River near Torgau. The symbolic handshake of the two armies happened to the accompaniment of American guns firing at the last German strongholds. Lieutenant William Robertson of the U.S. 69th Infantry Division, who was the first to greet the Soviet soldiers, later recalled, "When we embraced the Russians, the American howitzers boomed behind us. It was symbolic. Our artillery, which had terrorized the Germans for 3 years, now celebrated victory." In those same days came the last great artillery duels of the war. German gunners, loyal to the end, tried to resist Soviet and American firepower. But the balance was hopelessly unequal. Major Hans Friedrich, commander of the last functioning German battery in Berlin, described the final fight. "I had 6 guns and 40 shells. Against us were about 200 enemy guns. We fired until our ammunition ran out. Then we blew up our guns and surrendered." On April 30th, the day Hitler killed himself, American artillery fired its last shot of the war in Europe. A symbolic round, a 240mm Black Eva shell, aimed at an SS strongpoint on Berlin's outskirts. The 163-kilogram shell flew 32 kilometers and struck dead on, a building where the SS had made their final stand. The explosion was so powerful, it was heard 15 kilometers away. Captain James Mackenzie, who directed that shot, uttered the historic words, "This is the end. American artillery has put the final period on this war." The statistics of U.S. artillery in Europe defy imagination. Total shells fired, 2.7 billion total ammunition weight, 4.2 million tons, German guns destroyed, over 12,000 German soldiers killed by artillery, about 400,000. But the greatest achievement of American artillery wasn't the destruction it caused. It was the speed with which it ended the war. Without artillery supremacy, the fighting in Europe might have dragged on another year or two. General Dwight Eisenhower, Supreme Allied Commander, summarized its role. American artillery shortened this war by at least a year. It saved hundreds of thousands of our soldiers' lives, and millions of civilians. To truly grasp the phenomenon of American artillery supremacy, one must look at the numbers, the real story of the war. From June 1944 to May 1945, U.S. artillery in Europe fired 2,678,937,000 shells, nearly 2.7 billion. If laid end to end, they would stretch from Earth to the Moon and back, twice. The average daily fire rate of a U.S. division was 15,000 rounds. On heavy combat days, that figure soared to 40,000 to 50,000. By contrast, a German division fired 800 to 1,200 rounds per day. Accuracy was equally staggering. At 15 kilometers, the average U.S. shell deviated by no more than 50 meters. German guns of the same caliber had deviations of 150 to 200 meters. Reaction time, from spotting a target to first impact, took U.S. gunners an average of 3 minutes, 20 seconds. The Germans needed 15 to 20 minutes. This meant American artillery wasn't just stronger, it was a generation ahead. The difference between craftwork and high-tech industry. Professor Dennis Showalter of Colorado College calculated the effectiveness of different weapons in World War II. His results shocked many. U.S. artillery caused 60% of all German casualties on the Western Front. Tanks, 15%, aircraft, 12%, small arms, 13%. These figures rewrote conventional wisdom. Before World War II, artillery was seen as secondary, a support weapon for infantry. The Americans proved artillery could be the decisive factor itself. Colonel Conrad Crane of the U.S. Army War College analyzed 847 battles involving American forces. In 672 cases, 79.3%, artillery superiority determined victory. The most striking example, Mortain, August 7, 1944. The U.S. 30th Infantry Division faced a counterattack by the 2nd SS Panzer Division, Das Reich. The Germans had 89 tanks to America's 34, and 8,400 men against 6,200. But the Americans had 72 guns to the Germans' 18. In 2 hours, U.S. artillery destroyed 47 German tanks, 23 assault guns, and killed 2,000 men. The SS division was nearly annihilated. SS Obergruppenführer Paul Hauser wrote in his report, "American artillery superiority makes any attack suicide. We cannot fight an enemy who has 10 times more shells." Economic efficiency was also striking. The average cost of killing a German soldier with artillery was $600, $1945. With aircraft, $3,200. With tanks, $1,800. This meant U.S. artillery was not only the deadliest, but also the cheapest weapon in terms of cost effectiveness. America could afford a war of attrition. Germany could not. In the summer of 1945, as the dust settled, military analysts worldwide tried to understand the secret of America's success. The answer was both simple and profound. The Americans had not invented fundamentally new weapons. Guns, shells, radios, all existed before, but they combined them into a single system whose effectiveness far exceeded the sum of its parts. British General Bernard Montgomery, who fought alongside them, said, "The Yanks didn't just have more guns. They created a new philosophy of war, where artillery became the main instrument of victory." Marshal Georgy Zhukov of the Red Army, after studying U.S. artillery in detail, concluded, "American artillery is a triumph of organization and technology. They turned the chaos of war into exact science." But the sharpest analysis came from the defeated. Field Marshal Erich von Manstein wrote in his memoirs, "American artillery changed the nature of war forever. They proved that in modern war, victory belongs not to the best soldiers, but to the best organization and the largest resources. We did not lose on the battlefield. We lost in the factories of Detroit and Pittsburgh." The impact of the U.S. artillery revolution extended far beyond World War II. Principles developed between 1941 and 1945 became the foundation of all modern artillery systems. Centralized fire control, computerized targeting, satellite navigation, all are direct descendants of wartime American innovations. Today, systems like the American HIMARS or the German PZH-2000 can hit a car-sized target at 40 kilometers. Reaction time, under 60 seconds. Yet the psychological principles remain unchanged. Modern conflicts in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Ukraine prove that artillery superiority is still the key to victory. Ukrainian Colonel Oleksandr Tarnavsky, who commanded artillery during the battles for Bakhmut, said, "We study the American experience of 1944 and 1945. The principles of coordination, speed, and massed fire are just as relevant today. Even Russian analysts admit it." General Alexei Maslov wrote, "In the 1940s, the Americans were 2 generations ahead of their time. We are still trying to catch up." The paradox: a system built for destruction became the foundation for protection. Modern air defense, missile defense, and precision strike systems all trace their lineage back to the American artillery revolution of the 1940s. Today, nearly 80 years after the end of World War II, we can fully grasp the scale of America's artillery revolution. It changed not only the outcome of the war, but the very nature of armed conflict. Before the 1940s, war was considered an art. After the American Revolution, it became a science. Intuition was replaced by mathematical calculation. Heroism was replaced by technological superiority. Tactical skill was overshadowed by logistical efficiency. the consequences reached far beyond 1945. Nations that failed to adapt were doomed to defeat. Those who understood the American lesson gained the chance to win. Israel in the Arab-Israeli Wars, NATO in Yugoslavia, the coalition in Iraq, all drew on principles first forged by American gunners in the 1940s. Massed fire support, precision targeting, rapid response, and seemingly endless supplies of ammunition. But the most important lesson wasn't technical. It was philosophical. The Americans proved that in modern war, victory belongs not to the bravest army, but the best organized one. German soldiers in World War II may have been the best in the world in individual training and motivation, but they lost to the Americans, who were better organizers and logisticians. That lesson holds true today. Modern conflicts are won not by the best individual soldiers, but by those with the best command systems, the most reliable supply lines, the most efficient coordination of arms. American artillery in the 1940s was the first example of this systemic approach. It showed that victory depends not on isolated acts of heroism, but on the synchronized functioning of a vast machine. Colonel Trevor Dupuy, military historian, calculated that the American artillery system was 7.3 times more effective than the German one. Not because U.S. guns were 7 times better, but because the entire system worked 7 times more efficiently. Organization, logistics, communication, coordination, supply, all the boring, unheroic aspects of war proved more decisive than individual bravery. Sergeant Audie Murphy, America's most decorated soldier of World War II, once said, "Heroes win battles, but wars are won by logisticians." That could have been written on the banner of American artillery. Let us return to that December morning of 1944 in the Ardennes, where our story began. German soldier Hans Müller never understood what had struck him. To him, it was the end of the world, suddenly falling from the sky. But now we know it was not the end. It was the beginning of a new era, an era when firepower became the decisive factor in war, an era of technology over courage. 4,752 shells in 4 minutes. Not just a number, but a symbol of American superiority that shaped not only World War II, but the course of history that followed. The Germans could not believe what they saw because it defied their concept of war. They thought of war as a clash of wills, of national spirit, of character. The Americans approached it as an industrial process. And the approach that proved superior was not the noblest, not the bravest, not the most beautiful, but the most efficient. American artillery became the emblem of this new epoch, an age where industry mattered more than tradition, organization more than skill, systems more than heroism. That lesson remains valid today. Modern conflicts are not won by those with the longest military history, but by those who can mobilize resources and organize them most effectively. The American artillery revolution of the 1940s was the first clear example of this. It showed the world the future of war, a future where victory belongs not to the bravest, but the best organized. The Germans could not believe in American artillery because they could not believe in the future. They remained in the past, where war was art. The Americans stepped into the future, where war became science. And when thousands of shells rained down in minutes, it was not merely bombardment, it was the birth of a new age, an age we still live in. Was it good or bad? That is not for us to decide. But it was real, and it changed the world forever. American artillery did not simply win the war. It rewrote the rules of all future wars. And when we look today at precision strikes, rocket barrages, artillery duels from Donbass to the Middle East, we hear the echo of those December barrages of 1944. The sky became a weapon, and the Americans were the first to wield it.